Hello there, I'm Douglas Haig. I'm the Vice Chair and Director for Wales for the Residential Landlords Association, and welcome to the Jury's Inn in Cardiff for the third instalment of the Future Renting Wales conference. We're in the middle of a talk at the moment. I've managed to prize Bethan Jones, who's the Operational Manager for Rent Smart Wales, out to have a chat with us. So for those of you who don't know, Rent Smart Wales is part of it was implemented through the Housing Wales Act 2014, and it's part of the requirement for landlords to be registered and licensed to manage their own properties, and agents to be licensed to manage other people's properties as well. So, and Bethan is part of Cardiff Council that manage the overall scheme. So I can't ask her any political questions, even with the general election coming up, so I've got to keep them to Rent Smart Wales. So Bethan, you gave a very interesting talk earlier about the status of Rent Smart Wales. Do you want to summarise some of the points that you were making to us?
Well, I guess the talk was in three parts. One, giving a bit of an update about Rent Smart Wales and where we are. Some critical issues that landlords need to know about in terms of how to register their properties correctly and the plans for renewal of their licences next year. The second part was sharing really some information about what we now know about the private rented sector in Wales that we didn't know before, and that is as a result of the information that we've captured through the system. And then the final part was looking at how we're dealing with agents in Wales now to audit them, to try and secure improvements in their letting management practices.
So one of those areas as well that you talked about was around licence renewal, because we're obviously coming up to licence renewal. I think it's about 18 months, it's next year, isn't it?
2021.
Yeah, so 2 years' time. So, but people will want to be renewing their license or preparing for the renewal of licenses. You talked about continued professional development and the way that landlords and agents can renew their license. Where are you with that at the moment? What information can you give us about the potential requirements for license renewal and the Rent Smart Wales plans going forwards?
Yeah, so those people who have licensed already will know that they have to complete training in order to license, and that will be the same at license renewal stage. So what we don't want is for people to have to do the same training over again. We want it to be more valuable than that. So we're giving people the option of either completing a very similar course or doing continued professional development where they can pick and choose which options they would like to do in order to meet their licence requirements. We feel that that will be far more valuable for them and it can be catered really to their business model in terms of who they're renting to and what their issues are in their stock.
Okay, that's interesting. And another part of the process of improving the sector that you've talked about is around, and you alluded to it earlier, is around the agent auditing process, something that I don't think a lot of people realise was going to happen as part of Rent Smart Wales. Do you want to tell us about that and about the success or failures that you found so far in the agent auditing process?
Okay, so as part of a licence, conditions are attached, and every agent has a set of licence conditions. The licence conditions for agents require them to assist in the process of helping us to audit them. The plan is that we audit commercial agents in the main once every 5 years, so once during the term of their licence, and that's a really in-depth investigation into business practices and checking that all the safeguards that should be in place are in place. Really important safeguards that we ask agents for are things like client money protection, professional indemnity insurance, and that they are a member of a redress scheme. These measures not only help to protect tenants' interests, but also a landlord's interests.
It's interesting. So, because there was a question from the audience that you had, and kind of to paraphrase it, it was, you're doing this for agents and you're auditing agents. Why aren't you doing it for landlords? And do you have an intention of doing it for landlords as well?
We do. We do monitor compliance for landlords by responding to any complaints that come in relation to that particular landlord. So it's not that we're not monitoring licence conditions for landlords, but the agents manage about 50% of the private rented sector in Wales, and as a result, putting our resource into managing agents effectively has a massive impact on the sector as a whole. In due course, I'm sure we will increase the focus on landlords, but at the moment this is our priority.
Okay, so maybe a slightly more tricky question now. So, as you know, the Residential Landlords Association has never been a big fan of the implementation of Rent Smart Wales, mainly because of the some aspects we see unnecessary. We do agree the data that you showed us around the sector and the information there is really positive, and that's something we've agreed with. And also around the agent licensing aspect, we've always believed that agents should be regulated, and that will help improve the private rented sector. But we've seen some somewhat frustrating court cases and lack of possession being granted to landlords through not really any fault of their own. It's some rather idiosyncratic interpretations of the law. One of them's around possession cases that have failed because landlords that have rented a room in a house, the house is registered but the room isn't. What's your advice there at the moment for landlords?
Yeah. Yes, we've heard of these cases, and it was always the case that the law would be interpreted by the courts over time. So what we've done is to change our advice. We do advise landlords to look quite carefully at the properties that they've now registered, and to make sure that individual bedsits or shared houses where individual tenancies are being issued, that those units of accommodation are registered individually. That just protects the landlord moving forward if they needed to serve a Section 21 notice in particular.
And where we've come across areas where there wasn't the intention of the legislation to be read like this, and there are a number of those cases, including the one I've just mentioned. How do you feel about what's the advice going forwards about potentially working together to change those things to more run in line with what was originally intended?
Okay, well, in terms of registration of bedsits, shared houses, obviously what we don't want is a confusing picture for landlords. So what we will do next year when renewal of registrations is scheduled to start is change our system so that it becomes automatic, that those things are done without a landlord having to think differently about it. So that change is already planned and will be in place by November next year.
Okay, so you're effectively improving the system to actually try and reduce some of these areas of bureaucracy and areas that can trip landlords up at the moment.
We're definitely trying to simplify the system, make it easier for landlords, yeah.
Okay, so finally then, the future of Rent Smart Wales, are we like to see a bit of mission creep in the sense of continuing to increase the number of conditions and licences and all these sorts of things? Have you got anything that you can tell us now?
We're working with stakeholders all the time, as you know, to improve our offer. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is improve the private rented sector. If there are things that we can do fairly simply without overly burdening landlords and agents, then we will try to do that.
Great, thanks very much for that, and thanks for taking the time to be here with us today. I know that we're not always the friendliest of crowds to the Rent Smart Wales lot, but I think we've been fairly reasonable with you today. So that's Douglas Haig. I'm the Vice Chair of the Residential Landlords Association. I'm with Besson Jones, who's the Rent Smart Wales manager at the Juries in Cardiff Future Renting Conference.